drop of blood trembled beneath Conan's sword. It stretched slowly from the steel, heavy and dark, until it finally let go. The crimson drop struck the ancient stone. The sound was almost nothing, a single wet tap. Yet in the endless darkness below the earth, it echoed like thunder. Conan did not move. His breathing stopped. For several heartbeats, the city remained silent. Then came the answer. Not a roar, not a scream. Hundreds of dry claws scraped against stone at the exact same moment. From every tunnel, from every staircase, from every forgotten chamber, blind hunters turned their heads toward the sound. Conan closed his hand around the sword until his knuckles whitened. There would be no second mistake. For 7 days he had crossed this buried city without speaking, without coughing, without allowing steel to strike stone even once. He had survived by becoming quieter than death itself. Now the silence was gone, and everything beneath the earth knew exactly where he was. 7 days earlier, Conan had entered the silent city believing he had found shelter. Instead, he had stepped into the deadliest hunt of his life. 7 days earlier, the hills that hid the valley were absent from every map Conan had ever seen. Even among the wandering tribes, men lowered their voices when speaking of that place. They did not call it cursed. They did not claim demons lived beneath its stones. They simply avoided looking toward the mountains, as if the land itself demanded silence. That alone was enough to awaken Conan's curiosity. Robert E. Howard often wrote that Conan feared no ghost, no forgotten god, and no tale whispered around a campfire. What he respected was something far more dangerous, places where every living creature had already learned not to return. The Cimmerian had spent 3 days crossing broken cliffs where even wolves refused to hunt. There were no birds circling overhead, no insects buzzing through the dry grass. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass between the ancient rocks. Only silence. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Conan finally found what generations of men had tried to hide. A staircase. It had been carved directly into black stone, descending into the mountain itself. Massive pillars flanked the entrance, each worn smooth by centuries of forgotten rain. Strange symbols covered the walls, not the language of Aquilonia, Stygia, or any kingdom Conan had ever crossed. They belonged to an age so old that even ruins had become legends. Someone had built an entire city beneath the earth. Conan rested one hand against the cold stone. No dust. Someone or something had passed through here far more recently than time should have allowed. His instincts urged caution. His curiosity pushed him forward. The darkness swallowed him after only a few steps. Hours passed beneath the mountain. His torch revealed wide streets, towering arches, bridges suspended over impossible chasms, and statues whose faces had been worn away long before the kingdoms of men existed. Every chamber seemed larger than the last. Every corridor disappeared into darkness. Yet something felt terribly wrong. A city of this size should have echoed with life. Instead, nothing. No voices, no footsteps. Not even the faint dripping of water. The silence was so complete that Conan could hear the slow rhythm of his own heartbeat. He extinguished the torch. The darkness became absolute. His eyes adjusted little by little, catching pale shafts of light, filtering through cracks far above. It was enough. He preferred the darkness anyway. Conan continued deeper, every step measured with the patience of a hunter. His boots barely touched the stone. His sword remained in its scabbard. He trusted his instincts more than steel. Then he found the first body. The skeleton lay beside what had once been a marketplace. Rusted coins were scattered around its ribs. A shattered lantern rested nearby. There were no broken bones, no sword wounds, no signs of struggle. Only a frozen expression of terror carved into a skull that had stared into darkness for centuries. Conan crouched beside it. The lantern had never been relit. Whatever killed this man had given him no chance to fight. He continued, another skeleton, then another. Soon they appeared everywhere. Some sat against walls as if exhaustion had claimed them. Others lay in narrow corridors, fingers still stretched toward distant exits they had never reached. None carried battle wounds. None had escaped. Conan's expression hardened. An entire city had died without a war. That was impossible. As he rose to continue, his boot brushed against something hidden beneath the dust. It was a child's wooden toy. He stared at it for a long moment before quietly placing it back on the ground. Whatever had happened here, families had lived here, children had laughed here. Then every sound had vanished. If you're enjoying stories that stay true to the brutal spirit of Robert E. Howard, while exploring new legends worthy of Conan himself, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Many who watch discover us for the first time, but only those who subscribe become part of the Brotherhood of Cimmeria. And now, let's go deeper into the darkness. Conan moved forward once more. The passage narrowed until it opened into an enormous circular chamber. Hundreds of stone columns disappeared into the darkness overhead. The floor was covered with centuries of dust, untouched by wind. He stopped, there, near one of the pillars. A footprint, fresh, not human. Long, thin, four-clawed toes pressed clearly into the dust. Conan slowly lowered himself, studying the track without touching it. The creature was barefoot, heavy, and judging by the depth of the impression, it had passed through this chamber only moments earlier. Then, somewhere beyond the columns, a single scraping sound echoed through the darkness. Not loud, just enough to tell Conan one terrifying truth. He was no longer alone. The scraping came again, slow, deliberate, stone against stone. Conan remained perfectly still, every muscle locked beneath his skin. The sound drifted between the towering columns, impossible to place. It did not echo like the footsteps of a man. It crawled through the chamber like something dragging its own weight across the ancient floor. His fingers closed around the hilt of his sword. He did not draw it. Steel leaving its scabbard would whisper against leather, and even that tiny sound felt wrong in this place. The Cimmerian waited. Nothing. The silence returned so completely that it almost convinced him he had imagined the noise. Almost. Then another scrape answered from somewhere behind him. Conan turned with controlled precision. No one. Only endless pillars disappearing into darkness. He slowly crouched and picked up a pebble no larger than the tip of his thumb. Without changing his breathing, he tossed it across the chamber. The pebble struck the floor. Tick, the sound barely existed. Yet what followed froze even Conan. The scraping stopped. Instantly, every trace of movement vanished. It was as though the entire city had held its breath. Conan's eyes narrowed. That was no coincidence. Several heartbeats passed. Then the darkness exploded. Shapes burst from behind the columns with impossible speed. Tall, lean. Their pale skin stretched tightly over twisted muscles. Their eyeless faces tilted unnaturally as they sprinted toward the exact place where the pebble had landed. Their mouths opened wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, but they made no cries. Their claws struck the stone in violent bursts as dozens of them converged upon the empty spot. Conan watched from the shadows, scarcely 20 feet away. None of the creatures looked toward him. Not one. Instead, they clawed wildly at the ground where the pebble had fallen, searching for prey that was no longer there. Only after several moments did they slowly disperse, melting back into the darkness as silently as they had appeared. Conan finally understood the first law of the buried city. They were blind, completely blind, but their hearing was beyond anything found in the world above. He let several minutes pass before moving again. Each step became slower than the last. He rolled the weight of his feet carefully from heel to toe, barely allowing his boots to kiss the stone. Every loose fragment of rock was avoided. Every patch of broken masonry became an obstacle more dangerous than a sword. For the first time in years, Conan did not fear an enemy stronger than himself. He feared making a sound. The city became a maze of impossible choices. A collapsed bridge forced him to crawl across loose blocks of ancient granite. A narrow hallway was littered with broken pottery that could shatter beneath the slightest pressure. Twice he froze as creatures wandered only a few paces away, their heads swaying slowly while they listened to the endless silence surrounding them. Then came the first real test. One of the creatures emerged from a side passage directly in front of him. It was less than 10 feet away. Its eyeless face turned left, then right. Its nostrils flared. Conan did not move. The creature took another slow step, then another. It was walking directly toward him. His heart pounded against his ribs, and for the first time he wondered whether even a heartbeat could betray him. The creature stopped less than an arm's length away. Its head tilted. It listened. Conan's breathing became almost imperceptible. Long seconds crawled by. Finally, the creature turned and continued past him. Only after it vanished behind another pillar did Conan allow himself the smallest breath. He had survived. But he also realized something else. The creatures did not patrol alone. More scraping sounds drifted through the city. Different directions, different distances. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds. No man could fight an army that never needed to see him. Conan continued through the ruins until he reached what had once been a grand avenue. Massive statues lined both sides, their stone faces eroded by forgotten centuries. Beyond them stood a colossal bronze gate, still partially open. Fresh claw marks covered its surface. Something enormous had passed through there. As Conan studied the marks, his elbow brushed lightly against the hilt of his sword. The pommel tapped the bronze gate. Clink. The sound was tiny, smaller than a whispered word. Conan's eyes widened. From somewhere deep beyond the gate, one scrape answered. Then another. Then 10. Then hundreds. The entire city had heard him. The answer came from every direction, not screams, not growls, only the violent rhythm of claws striking stone. Hundreds of them. The sound rolled through the buried city like an avalanche racing through narrow canyons. Conan did not hesitate. He slipped through the half-open bronze gate just as the first creatures burst into the avenue behind him. Their claws raked across the metal, but they did not slow. They hurled themselves through the opening, guided only by the last sound they had heard. The chamber beyond was enormous. Towering pillars disappeared into darkness, supporting a ceiling so high that even Conan could not see it. Ancient bridges crossed empty space overhead, while broken staircases spiraled toward forgotten temples carved directly into the mountain. There was nowhere to hide, only places to disappear. Conan sprinted for 3 strides before forcing himself to stop. Running would only feed them. He pressed himself behind one of the massive columns, slowing his breathing despite the thunder of claws closing in around him. The creatures flooded into the chamber. Dozens, then scores, then more. Their pale bodies darted between the columns with terrifying speed. Heads tilted, nostrils flared. Clawed hands brushed the stone as they searched for another sound. None of them looked toward Conan, because none of them could. One creature stopped so close that Conan could smell the foul stench rising from its skin. Its sightless face hovered only inches beyond the edge of the column. It listened. Its chest expanded. Then it moved on. Conan waited. 5 heartbeats. 10. Only when the chamber settled back into silence did he move again. His eyes searched the floor. Loose stones, broken pottery, fragments of bronze. Every object had become either a weapon or a death sentence. He bent slowly and picked up a fist-sized piece of shattered masonry. Without exposing himself, he tossed it toward the opposite side of the hall. The stone struck a staircase. Crack. The effect was immediate. Every creature in the chamber turned as one. Then they exploded toward the sound. The floor trembled beneath hundreds of pounding feet. Conan watched carefully. Not one remained where it had been. A grim smile appeared for the first time since entering the city. He had just learned the second law of the Silent City. Their hearing was perfect. Their discipline was absolute. Every one of them abandoned its position to chase the newest sound. For the first time, the hunter had found a way to manipulate the hunt. He moved quickly while the chamber emptied, crossing between pillars until another corridor swallowed him. The passage narrowed, forcing him sideways between cracked walls. Here the silence became even heavier. Then a slow breath, not his own. Conan froze. It came from directly ahead. A single creature stood motionless in the darkness, almost invisible against the black stone. Unlike the others, it had not joined the chase. Perhaps it had never heard the thrown stone, or perhaps it had been too close. The creature slowly tilted its head, listening. Conan could not throw another rock. The corridor was too narrow. The sound would draw everything back. He had only one choice: kill, without allowing the victim to make a sound. He removed his sword 1 inch at a time. Leather whispered softly against steel. The creature twitched. Conan stopped immediately. Several endless seconds passed. Nothing. He continued. Another inch. Another. Finally, the blade came free without a single scrape. The creature took one cautious step forward. Conan moved first. His left arm locked around its throat before it could react. His right hand drove the blade deep beneath its jaw, angling upward into the brain. The creature convulsed violently. Its mouth opened. Conan slammed his forearm across its face, sealing the jaws shut before even the smallest cry could escape. Its claws tore through the leather around his shoulder. Warm blood poured over his arm. Not Conan's, the creature's. He tightened his grip. Harder. Harder still. The violent struggle weakened. The claws slowed. The body grew heavier. Finally, it became still. Conan did not release it. He counted silently in his mind, waiting to be certain no final gasp escaped the dying throat. Only then did he lower the corpse gently onto the stone floor. No sound. None. His breathing remained controlled, but his chest rose a little faster now. This place was changing him. Every fight he had ever survived demanded strength. This one demanded patience. He wiped the blade against the creature's pale skin before sliding it carefully back into the scabbard. Its blood covered his hands, his wrists, his chest. A dark stain spread across the fur draped over his shoulders. Hours earlier, he had entered the city looking like a wandering warrior. Now he looked like something born beneath the mountain itself. Then he noticed it. The creature wore something around its neck. Not armor, not a trophy. A simple strip of black leather. Attached to it, a small bronze bell. Conan stared at it in silence. The bell had been deliberately packed with hardened wax. Someone had sealed it so it could never ring. These creatures feared making noise just as much as he did. And if even the hunters feared the silence, then something far worse had to be waiting deeper inside the city. Conan turned the tiny bronze bell over in his hand. The wax sealing its hollow center had hardened with age, yet it remained perfectly intact. Whoever had placed it there had taken great care to ensure that it would never ring. He slipped the bell into the leather pouch on his belt. It was too strange to ignore. A hunter had no reason to silence its own weapon unless another hunter existed, one that even these creatures feared. That thought stayed with him as he pressed deeper into the buried city. Time had become impossible to measure underground. There was no sunrise, no sunset, only endless darkness broken by pale shafts of light filtering through cracks in the mountain. Hunger gnawed at him. His water skin had grown dangerously light. His muscles ached from moving with unnatural restraint. It was not the walking that exhausted him. It was the silence. Every step demanded thought. Every breath demanded control. Even swallowing had become something he did cautiously. Robert A. Howard always portrayed Conan as a man whose greatest weapon was adaptation. Kings relied on armies. Priests relied on gods. Conan relied on his instincts. The moment he understood the laws of a place, he bent himself to them faster than any civilized man ever could. That instinct was now keeping him alive. Hours later, the passage opened into another district of the ancient city. This one had once been residential. Stone homes rose in uneven rows, their carved balconies connected by narrow walkways suspended high above the streets. Broken furniture lay scattered where families had abandoned everything they owned centuries before. Conan paused beside one doorway. Inside, the remains of a meal still rested upon a stone table. Bowls, clay cups. Even the skeletons remained seated. One small skeleton rested against the ribs of a larger one, as though a frightened child had hidden in a parent's embrace until the very end. Neither had moved, neither had escaped. Conan lowered his eyes for only a moment before continuing. Death had visited this city all at once. Not through war, not through famine. Something had hunted every soul beneath this mountain. A faint scraping interrupted his thoughts. One creature wandered slowly through the empty street ahead. Then another emerged from between the houses. Then another. Conan immediately climbed the crumbling remains of a collapsed wall, pulling himself silently onto the rooftops. From above, he finally saw what he had been unable to understand until now. There weren't hundreds. There were thousands. The pale creatures moved through every street, every bridge, every temple, and every courtyard below. They wandered without purpose until the smallest sound redirected the entire mass toward a new location. The city itself was alive, not because of civilization, because of the hunt. Conan remained motionless, studying them. Patterns began to emerge. Certain streets remained empty. Certain staircases were never crossed. Even the creatures avoided specific parts of the city. They were not wandering freely. They were keeping away from something. His gaze followed one abandoned avenue that disappeared toward the deepest section of the ruins. No creatures entered it. Not one. Whatever lay beyond frightened even them. Conan made his decision. If there was another way out of the city, it would be there. He crossed the rooftops one careful step at a time until part of the ancient stone beneath his boot shifted. A single tile slid from the roof. It bounced once, then fell into the street below. Clack! Conan cursed himself silently. Every creature within sight froze. Hundreds of pale heads turned upward together. For one endless heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the rooftops exploded beneath him. The creatures did not climb like men. They launched themselves upward with terrifying speed, driving their claws into cracks in the stone and scrambling across walls like monstrous spiders. Conan ran, not wildly, not blindly. Every stride had purpose. He leaped across a narrow alley as the first creature reached the rooftop behind him. It caught only the edge of his fur cloak. Conan ripped the cloak free before the creature could pull him backward. Another landed directly ahead. There was no room to avoid it. His sword flashed. One clean horizontal cut opened the creature's throat before it could react. Its mouth stretched open in silent agony. Conan caught its head with his free hand, forcing the body backward as blood poured across both of them. The creature thrashed violently. Its claws tore through his arm. He refused to let go, not until every movement stopped. He lowered the corpse onto the roof. Too late. The struggle itself had produced enough sound. More claws hammered across the stone behind him. Dozens. Conan abandoned stealth. He sprinted across the rooftops, vaulting broken chimneys and shattered walls, while the entire district awakened beneath him. The hunt had changed. No longer was he avoiding isolated patrols. Now an entire section of the buried city was converging on his position. Ahead, the rooftops ended abruptly at a massive plaza, unlike anything he had yet seen. In its center stood 12 colossal black columns surrounding an enormous circular pit. No creatures crossed into the plaza. They stopped at its edges. They listened. Then, one by one, they slowly backed away. Conan followed their gaze toward the darkness inside the pit. For the first time since entering the silent city, he heard something that did not belong to the blind hunters. A single breath, deep, slow, powerful enough to make the stone beneath his boots vibrate. Something immense was sleeping below. Conan remained at the edge of the great pit, listening. The breath came again, slow, deep. The air itself seemed to pulse with it. Unlike the blind hunters, whatever slept beneath the plaza made no attempt to hide its existence. It breathed with the calm certainty of a creature that had never known fear. The Cimmerian looked around the circular plaza. The 12 black columns surrounding the pit were unlike the rest of the city's architecture. They were smoother, darker, and carved from a stone that reflected almost no light. Thick bronze chains stretched from one column to another high above the abyss, forming an enormous ring over the darkness below. Then Conan noticed something else. Every chain was under tension, not decorative. Holding something, his eyes followed them downward. They disappeared into the blackness. Whatever lay beneath had once been imprisoned, or perhaps it still was. A faint scraping echoed behind him, then another. The hunters had not entered the plaza. They remained beyond the columns, pacing nervously like wolves unwilling to approach a fire. Their heads pointed toward Conan, but none dared take another step. That frightened him more than if they had attacked. Predators do not fear without reason. Conan slowly approached the edge of the pit. Cold air drifted upward from impossible depths. He picked up a pebble. For several moments he simply weighed it in his hand. Then he released it. The stone vanished into darkness. No impact, no echo, only silence. The shaft was far deeper than he had imagined. As he leaned slightly farther forward, something below moved, not upward, not toward him, simply moved. A massive shape shifted beneath the darkness, large enough to blot out the faint light rising from below. Conan immediately stepped back. Whatever lived there was enormous, far larger than any beast he had hunted. Before he could study it further, a faint crack sounded behind him. One of the creatures had finally crossed into the plaza. Then another, then another. Fear had lost the battle against instinct. The last sound they had heard belonged to Conan. The hunt had begun again. Conan drew his sword. This time there would be no hiding. The first hunter lunged. His blade flashed once. The creature's head separated cleanly from its shoulders before its claws could reach him. Conan caught the falling body with his shoulder, preventing it from crashing onto the stone. The second arrived immediately. He stepped inside its attack, drove his elbow into its throat, and buried the sword beneath its jaw. His left hand crushed the creature's mouth shut while it convulsed. No scream escaped. Its blood poured across Conan's chest, soaking the leather and fur until he seemed painted in crimson. A third creature attacked from behind. Conan released the dying body just long enough to pivot. His boot shattered its knee. As it collapsed, he drove the point of his sword through the roof of its mouth. Again, silence. Everything happened within seconds. Efficient, merciless, necessary. More hunters entered the plaza. 5, 10, 20. Conan's breathing remained controlled, but he knew the truth. No man could repeat this forever. Sooner or later, someone would make enough noise. Then it happened. One wounded creature stumbled backward instead of dying immediately. Its body slammed into one of the black columns. The impact rang through the plaza. A deep metallic boom rolled into the pit below. Every hunter froze. Even Conan stopped moving. The breathing beneath the abyss ceased. Complete silence consumed the city. Then the chains trembled. Once, twice, a shower of ancient dust fell from the columns. The hunters immediately abandoned Conan. Every single one turned toward the pit, not to attack, to flee. For the first time, the Cimmerian watched terror consume the creatures that had hunted him for 7 endless days. They scattered in blind panic, climbing walls, vaulting rooftops, disappearing into distant streets with desperate speed. Conan looked back toward the abyss. Something enormous was climbing. He could hear claws grinding against stone deep below. One chain snapped. The sound thundered across the entire buried city. A second chain broke, then a third. The black columns shuddered violently. Cracks spread across the plaza beneath Conan's feet. Only then did he understand the true purpose of the silent city. It had never been built to protect those who lived inside. It had been built as a prison. The blind hunters were never its rulers. They were its guards. Generation after generation, they had hunted every living thing that entered these ruins for one simple reason: to ensure that no foolish traveler ever awakened what slept beneath the mountain. Now, because of one careless impact against an ancient column, the prison was breaking, and something that should have remained buried forever was coming into the light. The first column split from top to bottom. A crack raced through the black stone like lightning, trapped inside the rock. Then the entire plaza lurched beneath Conan's feet. Chunks of masonry broke away and disappeared into the abyss. Ancient bronze chains, stretched for centuries under unbearable tension, snapped one after another with deafening reports that echoed across the buried city. For the first time since entering the ruins, silence no longer existed. The mountain itself was roaring. Conan staggered backward as dust and fragments of stone rained from above. Then a claw emerged from the darkness. It was enormous, longer than a man's sword, black as obsidian with hooked talons that carved deep furrows into solid rock as the creature pulled itself upward. A second claw followed, then another. The massive shape rose slowly from the pit, revealing a body unlike anything Conan had ever faced. It stood nearly twice the height of a man, its skin wrapped tightly over powerful muscles, marked by old scars and broken chains still hanging from its wrists and shoulders. Unlike the pale hunters, this creature possessed no empty eye sockets. Its eyes were open, ancient, intelligent, filled with something far worse than hunger, hatred. It lifted its head and inhaled deeply, not searching by sound. Searching by scent, Conan understood immediately. This was the reason the hunters had sealed the bells around their own necks. This creature heard, it saw, it smelled. It possessed every advantage its servants lacked. The giant's gaze settled upon Conan. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the beast smiled, not like an animal, like something that remembered mankind. It charged. The stone beneath its feet shattered with every step. Conan rolled aside as one colossal hand slammed into the plaza, pulverizing the ground where he had stood only a heartbeat before. His sword flashed toward the creature's ribs. The blade struck. Sparks burst from the impact. The steel cut flesh, but only barely. The giant answered with a sweeping backhand that hurled Conan across the plaza. He crashed into one of the black columns hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Pain exploded through his back. His sword slid across the stone. Stopping only a few feet away, the beast advanced without haste. It had imprisoned kingdoms. It had waited centuries. One wounded man meant nothing. Conan forced himself upright. His eyes never left the monster. Instead of charging, he looked beyond it, at the columns, at the chains, at the cracks spreading through the ancient foundations. Then he smiled, not because he believed he could overpower the beast, because he finally understood how to kill it. The giant lunged again. Conan snatched up his sword and sprinted not toward the exit, but straight between the towering columns. The creature followed immediately. Every thunderous footstep shook loose more stone. Conan leaped over a widening crack in the floor. The giant landed directly behind him. The impact split the base of one column. A deep fracture spread upward, exactly as Conan had hoped. He changed direction sharply. The giant pursued. Again and again it smashed into the ancient supports, driven by fury instead of reason. Each collision weakened the prison that had once held it. Dust poured from the ceiling. Entire sections of masonry collapsed around them. Then Conan saw his opportunity. One of the immense bronze chains had fallen within reach, still wrapped around the top of a cracked column. He climbed at the broken stones with desperate speed. The giant roared and reached for him, too late. Conan seized the hanging chain with both hands and threw his full weight against it. The weakened column groaned, stone cracked. The ancient support leaned. For one endless heartbeat. Nothing happened. Then gravity claimed it. The massive black column crashed into the next. That one struck another. Then another. Like falling trees across a forest, all 12 supports began collapsing in sequence around the plaza. The giant looked upward. For the first time, fear crossed its face. Thousands of tons of ancient stone came crashing down. The beast disappeared beneath the avalanche. The shockwave threw Conan from the collapsing platform onto a fractured bridge leading away from the plaza. Behind him, the prison died. Ahead of him, the city awakened. The collapse echoed through every tunnel beneath the mountain. The blind hunters poured into the streets in numbers beyond counting, not hunting Conan, running toward the destruction, toward the endless thunder of falling stone. Exactly as he had hoped. Every creature followed the greatest sound. The entire swarm abandoned every other instinct. Conan ran through collapsing corridors while the city consumed itself. Bridges shattered behind him. Temples folded into clouds of dust. Columns crashed through ancient streets. The mountain was burying its own secret forever. At last, far ahead, he saw daylight. Real daylight. He climbed the final staircase as the earth trembled beneath his boots. The instant he reached the surface, the mountainside collapsed behind him with a roar that seemed to shake the entire valley. A cloud of dust climbed into the morning sky. Then silence returned. Conan stood alone at the edge of the ruined entrance, his body covered in dried blood that belonged almost entirely to the creatures below. He looked back only once. No victory cry escaped his lips. No boast. No celebration. Robert E. Howard's Conan never sought glory for surviving impossible places. Survival itself was enough. He cleaned his sword on the fur draped across his shoulder before sliding the blade quietly into its scabbard. Then the Cimmerian turned his back on the mountain. Some prisons were never meant to be opened, and some victories were worth speaking about. Only after you were certain the thing beneath the earth could no longer hear you. The mountain continued to groan long after Conan long had escaped its depths. From the safety of a distant ridge, he watched the valley disappear beneath an immense cloud of dust. Entire cliffs folded inward as if the earth itself had grown tired of carrying the forgotten city beneath its weight. Massive cracks raced across the mountainside before everything settled into stillness. The entrance was gone, buried beneath thousands of tons of stone. No road would ever lead another traveler there again. Conan remained where he was, saying nothing. His chest rose heavily after 7 days without true rest. His arms burned from countless silent battles. Fresh cuts crossed his shoulders, while dried blood covered nearly every inch of his body. Most of it was not his own. He looked less like a victorious warrior, and more like a man who had climbed out of the underworld itself. Slowly he removed his sword. The blade was scarred. Small chips lined its edge where it had struck ancient stone, claws, and the flesh of creatures no kingdom had ever named. Kneeling beside a narrow stream flowing through the valley, Conan washed the steel first. Only then did he wash the blood from his hands. That was his way. A warrior who neglected his blade rarely lived long enough to tell stories. As the crimson water drifted downstream, something caught his attention inside the pouch hanging from his belt, the small bronze bell, the one he had taken from the dead hunter. He held it between his fingers for a long time. The wax sealing its hollow center remained untouched. Conan studied it in silence before finally understanding what generations before him had learned. The hunters had never worn those bells as ornaments. They were reminders, a warning carried around every neck: never make a sound. Not because they feared each other, but because they feared what listened beneath them. Without another thought, Conan buried the tiny bell beneath a pile of stones overlooking the valley. Some warnings deserved to remain where they belonged. The wind finally returned. It carried the scent of pine trees instead of dust, and for the first time in days, Conan heard birds singing somewhere beyond the cliffs. Life had returned to the mountain, or perhaps it had simply been waiting for the silence to end. As the sun climbed higher, the Cimmerian adjusted the fur across his shoulders and resumed walking toward the western horizon. He neither searched for treasure nor looked back at the place that had nearly become his tomb. Robert E. Howard never wrote Conan as a man who chased legends. He survived them. Others would one day tell stories about a buried city where no traveler returned, inventing monsters, curses, and forgotten gods around campfires. Conan would never correct them. He had no desire to convince anyone of what he had seen beneath that mountain. Some truths sounded like madness. Others were too dangerous to speak aloud. There are victories won through strength, others through courage. But once in a lifetime, a man survives only because he knows when to remain absolutely silent. Conan disappeared into the wilderness without another word, leaving behind a mountain that would never again reveal the horror sleeping beneath its stone. And somewhere far below the earth, where the last fragments of the silent city lay crushed beneath the weight of a collapsing world, silence ruled once more.